Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years. We're dedicated to delivering quality auto parts, expert customer service, fast and free shipping, all backed by our 100% satisfaction guarantee. We've created thousands of videos to help you install our parts with confidence, and that saves you time and money. So visit us at 1aauto.com, your trusted source for quality auto parts.
In this video, we're going to be working with our 2001 Ford Ranger 4.0 liter V6. We're going to show you how to remove and replace your power steering pump. If you like this video, please click subscribe. We have a ton more information on this truck as well as many other makes and models. And if you ever need parts for your vehicle, you can follow the link down in the description over to 1aauto.com. Here are the items you'll need for this repair. We're going to remove this cover over the throttle body. Use a small Phillips head screwdriver to remove these two screws and a 7mm socket and ratchet for the bolt in the back. Remove the cover from the intake. We're going to use a flat blade screwdriver to loosen these two screw type clamps on our intake tube. We'll then wiggle the tube off of the MAF sensor in the throttle body and remove it from the vehicle. You'll also have to remove this breather line from the back. So we'll remove the intake tube from the throttle body and the MAF. Pull it straight off the breather and remove it from the vehicle. Your Serpentine belt tensioner is located on the passenger side of the engine, just below the alternator. At the bottom, there's a 3/8 square drive, which we'll use the end of a 3/8 drive ratchet for. Install it into the drive the same way you would install a socket onto the ratchet. We're going to pull that clockwise to put some tension onto the belt and keep our pulley from rotating, while we use a 10mm socket and ratchet to crack the bolts on the pulley loose. There's 3 of the 10mm bolts on here. You don't want to remove them fully, you just want to break that initial torque off of them. So when we remove our ratchet and take the tension off of the belt, we can finish removing them. Once you've got them cracked loose, go ahead and switch your ratchet around so you can rotate counterclockwise and take the tension off of the belt and remove it from the pulleys. Make sure your vehicle has either a belt path diagram somewhere in the engine bay, and if it doesn't, you can draw one up yourself. Remove your ratchet from the tensioner, and you don't have to fully remove the belt here, so I'm just going to let it hang. Remove those bolts from the pulley. Once the bolts are out, there is a little bit of a tension fit here on the pulley, so you may have to tap it off. If you rotate it back and forth a little, it'll actually walk the pulley off nice and easy. You can remove it from the vehicle. At this point, if you haven't removed the belt fully, go ahead and do that, because we're going to be using some penetrating oil, and when we remove the lines for the power steering pump, we're going to let some fluid out. You don't want to get that onto your belt because they could damage the rubber. Once that's out of the way, we'll spray some penetrating oil on this fitting here. And let that soak in for a minute. This flare nut here is an 18mm. Now the best way to try to remove one of these flare nuts is with a 5-point flare nut wrench. If you don't have one, you can use an open end. You just want to give it a good feel when you're trying to loosen it to make sure it doesn't feel like it's going to round off. And ours moves nice and freely. Now this can be a little tough to get at. So if you have a stubby 18mm wrench, we recommend you use that once you've cracked it loose. Otherwise, you'll just have to go there about 1/8 of a turn at a time to get it out. If you have one of the ratcheting wrenches or a small adjustable wrench, those tend to be a little bit smaller too, and once the majority of the torque is off of this, they're pretty easy to remove. Before fully removing this nut, make sure that you have a drain bucket under the vehicle to catch all of the power steering fluid that's going to come out of here. And once it's cracked loose there, finish it by hand, pop the line out, let that power steering fluid drain out into your catch pan. Now sometimes you can remove the rubber hose here at the bottom that feeds the power steering fluid into the pump from the reservoir, but ours is in a pretty tough spot to get that clamp off, so we'll remove the pump first, then the hose once we can move it around and get it where we want it. To do this, we'll use a 10mm socket and ratchet to remove these 3 bolts from the pump. Once the bolts are out, the pump can be moved down and out of the bracket. Make sure you still have your drain bucket under there because some fluid may come out from you moving it around. It'll definitely come out when we remove the line from the reservoir. Now we can get a good grip on that clamp to remove the hose from the bottom of our pump. Using a pair of pliers, compress the clamp. Slide it down, and if the hose is stuck on there, you can gently grab it with the pliers and twist the pump and the hose back and forth until it comes free. Now there's nothing wrong with our old power steering pump, so we're going to go ahead and reinstall it. Place the inlet line back on. Using your pliers, compress that clamp and slide it back up on top of the rubber hose. We'll work it back down past the fan here. And remember, the blades on that fan are only plastic, so be very careful not to put too much pressure against them and risk breaking them. Move the pressure line out of the way if you have to. Line the pump up and start your 3 10mm bolts by hand. Then tighten your bolts down with a 10mm socket and ratchet. Reinstall your power steering pressure line into the bottom of the pump. Start the flare nut by hand. Once you've got the flare nut started, go ahead and tighten it back down with your 18mm wrench. Remember, while a stubby is suggested, this is doable with a full-size wrench. You're just not going to be able to get as long of a swing on it. Reinstall your power steering pulley onto the pump. You want to try to line this up as best you can because it's a little difficult to move once you get it worked on there. Then reinstall your 3 10mm bolts by hand. Make sure you get them down as tight as you can. So we're going to loop our belt here, feed it down, and hook it around the crankshaft to start. We're coming in from the passenger side here because that's how it's going to be easiest to route our belt. Once we're hooked around the crank, we'll run the smooth part of our belt over the water pump to the driver's side. We'll go under our AC compressor at the far end. Be sure that that's seated in fully. We'll go over our power steering pump at the top here. We'll run the other side of the belt coming off of our crank around the tensioner. That's from underneath, so the ribbed part will also be touching the tensioner the same way it comes out from under the crank. And the ribbed portion will go again over the top of our alternator. Now when we release tension, we can push down in the middle and go underneath our smooth idler pulley. Reinstall our ratchet into the tensioner. Turn it counterclockwise again. Try to get as much swing here so we can pull it over pretty far. Go underneath the smooth pulley. Inspect one more time for proper belt path and that you are not hooked on the edge of any pulleys. With your ratchet still in the tensioner, turn it clockwise as hard as you can to put some extra tension on the belt, and then tighten down your 10mm power steering pulley bolts. Remove your ratchet from the tensioner and reinstall your intake components so you can run the vehicle. Reinstall the breather line in both ends of the intake tube to the throttle body and the airbox. Tighten down the clamps with a flat blade screwdriver. Reinstall the engine cover. We'll tighten down the front two screws with a Phillips head screwdriver, and the rear with a 7mm socket. We're using a lift, but you can use a jack and jack stands to get the front tires of your truck off of the ground. This way we don't have a lot of resistance when we initially bleed the power steering system. Remove the cap on your power steering reservoir and install a funnel. These particular trucks don't use power steering fluid. They actually use the same automatic transmission fluid that their transmission uses. In this case, it's Mercon 5. Fill the reservoir completely with fluid. You actually may want to leave just a little bit of airspace at the top to prevent it from splashing out, but we'll leave our drain bucket under the truck just in case. Now we'll start the vehicle and move the steering wheel left completely to the lock, bounce it off of the lock a couple of times, bring it all the way the other way, and you'll hear as the system fills, it'll quiet down and then start whining again from air in the system, at which point we'll top it off and repeat the process until the whining noise stops. Start your vehicle. Bring the wheel all the way in one direction to the lock a couple of times and release, and then go all the way in the other direction. Check your fluid level and top off if necessary. Our fluid is right up top, so we'll lower the weight of the vehicle back onto the tires. Now there'll be a little more resistance on our steering components, and that should force out any remaining air in the system. Check your fluid again, top off if necessary, and then reinstall the cap. You're now ready to test drive your vehicle.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.